Hi, my name is Bob Brooks, and today I have a very important message for you. I follow a lot of economic indicators and stock market indicators and longer-term analysis that is pretty good at predicting things. And unfortunately, they're all pointing towards one thing: economic collapse. They're also pointing towards a currency crisis. You know, with $18.5 trillion worth of debt and that debt growing every day, it's unsustainable. And we're getting to a point where we're going to see the downside to this. And the question is, are you going to be prepared? Now, when you get that kind of a message, and you hear a doom and gloom message like that, what do you start thinking? You start thinking, what am I going to do? Is this really true? Is this credible? Could this really happen? And a little anxiety builds up. And the reality of it is that doom and gloom messages, no one can predict the future. No one can predict exactly what's going to happen. Although there's people out there that want you to believe that they can predict it. And one of those is former politician Ron Paul. He has a video that went viral this year and talking about economic collapse. This is some of the excerpts from it. The way you live, work, travel, retire, and invest in America, everything is going to change. Some of it in ways most people do not expect. This period is going to be particularly tough on seniors and anyone relying on a fixed income or money from the government. Trouble is coming. Please make sure you, your family, and anyone you care about are prepared. Now, you got to see the setup for this video. It's someone interviewing him, and he's asking him questions. And I wanted to read you some of the excerpts from this. He says, you know, Mr. Paul, how bad is this going to get? And he says, very bad, probably worse than the Great Depression, a brink of a massive financial crisis, full-blown currency crisis. Savings of millions could be wiped away. The stock market could crash 50% or more. The way of life that we have enjoyed as Americans could come to an end. It's not a question of if it is going to happen, it is when. Entire financial system collapse. We'll see massive changes in our retirement. I wouldn't be surprised to see the government take over people's 401ks and IRAs. A wealth tax, a fee on all of your savings and assets. And then he says, worse than 1929 stock market crash, Black Monday, and 2008 all in one day. Then he says, what really worries me isn't necessarily a stock market crash. I got to tell you, if all three of those things happened, we would be a little bit concerned. But he says we're going to lose our liberty. When you destroy a currency, you destroy businesses, you destroy friendships and families. So you are predicting social unrest, asked the interviewer. He says, definitely. We're already seeing the beginnings of that. And then he makes a loose reference to Ferguson, which I didn't know that was, I don't think that had anything to do with an economic collapse. It looks like he is reading from a teleprompter, and then every scripted word comes out at the very bottom of the screen. And then he says, I've got a blueprint. I have the solution to help you through this situation. Jim Rickards, and I've actually interviewed him a couple of times on my radio show. He says, same type of video, warns that a 70 to 80% stock market crash followed by rioting and the rise of neo-fascism is one of the possible outcomes from growing systemic instability. Now, I'm sure a lot of people will look at that and go, what is growing systemic instability? And they're probably thinking, boy, that sounds bad for sure. But, you know, you get all of this messaging. What do you do with it? You know, you're sitting in your office, or you're sitting at home just minding your own business, going through emails, and then you see a forward from a friend. Check this Ron Paul video out. I can't believe that this could happen. Do you think it's credible? Do you think there could be economic collapse? You watch it, and it stirs up all kinds of emotions. I can't tell you how many questions that I've received from clients and from listeners of my radio show about this Ron Paul video and this gloom and doom messaging. And, you know, here's the thing about what we're trying to accomplish through these teaching courses. We're trying to teach you how to make decisions, trying to teach you information that you can take and apply to your life. And appreciate the fact that you're watching this right now, because that means you're being intentional about learning. That's the only way you can truly be successful. My concern is that people are using these doom and gloom messages as ways of getting information, of ways of learning. And that is, you've got to realize what's happening here, because this is not only gloom and doom messaging, it is gloom and doom marketing. Maybe not so much a credible resource. It's sensationalized predictions of the worst case scenario by someone who has credibility. And I got to tell you, it's the most effective form of marketing. That's why companies use it. The identity theft business has been using this for years. They make every security breach look like the worst case scenario, which is not true. So you have to learn to spot this so that you can look at something and go, you know what, that's a credible information, credible resources. I should listen to that, pay attention, or, that's just marketing. And you need to be able to tell the difference between the two. Gloom and doom marketing process, it's all the same. If you took both of those videos that I referred to, the Jim Rickards video and the Ron Paul video, they're both the same process, both the same setup, both the same strategy. Let's talk a little bit about it. First, what they do is they introduce the problem and make the prediction. And they go through a very over-sensationalize with the worst case scenario. And I got to tell you, it was painful, but I sat through that entire video. I think it was an hour. And it was beautifully done. As far as gloom and doom marketing goes, it was beautifully done. He hit on everything people fear the most. Let's go through the list. You're going to lose your family, your friendships, your relationships. The currency's going to collapse. You're going to lose your liberty. And then the one thing that people are really fearing because of all the rumors that have gone through the internet is that the government's going to confiscate your 401k plans and your IRAs. And I mean, he hit on everything bad that possibly could happen. Wipe out your savings. Over-sensationalized, did a beautiful job of that. And then they build the credibility of the person delivering the message. Now, not too difficult to build the credibility of Ron Paul. He's been a career politician, I think, for over 40 years. They put pictures of him with Reagan. They connected him to Reagan. They connected him to all the Federal Reserve Board chairmen and throughout all the years, all the committees he's been on. So if you watch this, you think, well, Ron Paul is an expert on this. And what he's saying has to be credible. And then they introduce, and this is key that you get this, part of the solution. And when I say part of the solution, because really what this is building to is a two-part solution. So part one in this particular example is that he's delivering the blueprint that he calls. A lot of information. He's talking about it. He's talking about what you'll read about. As a listener of the video, as you're watching this, you're saying to yourself, this is good. This is great information. I'm going to probably have to buy this. And then he delivers that it's free. It catches you off guard. You're going to send me all this, a $300-something value for free. And then he goes into a transfer of credibility to what this whole marketing message has been building up to. He transfers it and he says it like this. He says, this is only part of the solution. The other part is the investments. What are you supposed to do? Now, I'm not an expert on investments, says Ron Paul. He says, but I've been searching and I found the right person, the person that I trust with my own investments. And this is a name you need to know. Porter Stansberry is the guy that you need to be listening to. Now, I'm going to stop here and say this. This whole entire messaging has built up to this moment, the introduction of Porter Stansberry. Let me tell you a little bit about Porter Stansberry. He is probably the best at gloom and doom marketing. You've probably seen some of his videos that have gone viral through the years, the End of America videos. And people watch this and they get really concerned because, the problem with today is it's all believable. After everything we've gone through in the financial crisis, anything is believable. And so he does a great job over-sensationalizing. What he'll do with every one of these videos, he'll predict something's going to happen. He'll predict a date, and he'll tell you what's going to happen. Of course, it never happens. And then he changes up the video. He'll call it End of America 2013, or he'll change it to something else. He'll change his website. He'll start the process all over again. It'll go viral. He'll predict a date. It doesn't happen. Then he does it again. And last year, I think it was in July of last year, it was some type of a currency crisis that was supposed to happen, and it never happened. Now he's changed the way he markets. And he goes and he uses people like Ron Paul to market his newsletters for him. And that's what he's currently doing, and he's not dating anything. And then what they do on this video is that Porter Stansberry, they talk about his newsletter. And everything he does, I'm telling you, the guy's a marketing genius, but you got to understand what's happening here, is that it's all about getting subscriptions to his newsletter. Because if you want all the free stuff, you have to sign up for the 14-day trial with your credit card, of course, to get all the free stuff and the introductory to the newsletter. So this is what this whole thing is building to. Now, having said that, Now that you can take and separate what's marketing and what's not, you're looking for credibility and trust. That's what you want to find in your resources that you're getting good education from. Now, the takeaways for the videos. Now, if you think about what these videos are talking about, this is some real stuff. I mean, at the time of this shooting, $18.5 trillion of debt. And we are borrowing as a country a little bit over, right, at least at this point, a little bit over half of everything we're spending. That would be like you have $10,000 coming in a month and you're spending 20 and you're borrowing the other 10. And then the cronyism, it isn't going away. I was interviewing Jay Cost last week on my radio show, and he wrote a great book about cronyism. He's a political analyst. And this is at the heart of almost every problem we have in America, is that politicians are taking care of their friends, and their friends are taking care of the politicians, and the politicians are able to stay in office. I mean, that's what cronyism is. And they're doing that, of course, with taxpayer money. Now, unless politicians have a change of heart and do things differently, maybe the right way, this is not going to get any better. It's worked for them, it's kept them in office, and they're going to probably continue to do this. And this is at the heart of the problem. I also interviewed Dr. Elena George not too long ago in her great book, Big Medicine. She talks about the reality from a doctor's perspective of what's going on with Obamacare, and she points to the same exact problem. Cronyism is driving the problem with Obamacare. So this makes us vulnerable as a country and vulnerable economically. We're going to have, in an uncertain future, you're going to have shocks to the system. It's the ability to absorb those shocks, and we're very weak at this point. So here's the reality of it, though. It's tough to predict the ending. That's what I kind of get a kick out of these individuals who get up and they start making forecasts and predicting what's going to happen. We're in unprecedented times. And it's tough. I mean, anything can happen. You've got to know that. So the bottom line is this. What do you do? Because there is no question we have an uncertain future. There is no question that this is unsustainable, and this has an end game. Now, that end game could be tomorrow, could be 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 5 years, who knows? But it's about being prepared. And the reality of it is that whether or not the future is uncertain or not, these are principles that is important to prepare you for those times when the shock to the system happens, when uncertainty grows great to where you can absorb that. Let's take a look. Number one, be mindful and pay attention. This is why I like to interview different authors on my radio show, because I want to bring to my listeners information that they're not reading about, that they're not hearing about, and gives them the real background of what's going on that the media is not covering. But be mindful and pay attention to what's going on. Second, organize and track your finances. I wrote an article one time and posted on PrudentMoney.com talking about, and it was something like the one thing you could do right now that could drastically change your financial future, and that is simply organizing your finances. You have X amount of dollars coming in, you have X amount of dollars going out, and we don't do that as a whole. Most people don't really track, don't know where their money's going, where they're spending, where they could be more efficient, what they could cut out. I did a teaching video on, it's called I Don't Believe in Budgets. And I talk about this whole process. You should check it out because this will help you get organized with your finances. And then get out of debt. So many times people who have a lot of debt will just carry it around, will not be intentional about getting out of debt. One of the things that I write about in my book, Deceptive Money, is that it's all about being intentional. You got to look at debt as a season. And most people that come into my office that have a lot of debt and don't know what to do, they come in with very, very little hope. And they act as if I'm going to die with this debt. And by the time we get through and look at it and I show them the steps to take, they're shocked that a season of 4 years they could be completely out of debt. And it's because they have not bothered to get the information. Once again, it comes back to intentional learning. But be intentional about getting out of debt. Because when you're out of debt and you're completely debt-free, you have options. And you can also handle uncertainty much better. Adequate savings. You know, one thing that never made sense to me was that, all the popular finance books and teaching courses all say the very first thing that you should do is invest into a 401k plan. That's where you should focus your savings on. So let me ask you a question. What good is it to have a lot of money for the long term that you can't touch and not have anything in savings, not have anything for an emergency account? It makes absolutely no sense. That's why I always put an emphasis on this goes against the grain a little bit about building that emergency account, having adequate cash. In an uncertain future, cash is king. And make sure that you have a good emergency account. Now, you might be thinking, but Bob, that earns nothing in a bank. Absolutely, and that's not the point. The point of an emergency account is to have money for emergency, not to make money off of it. But having adequate savings is important. Money somewhere outside of the bank. Now, as we're looking at this, what we're trying to do is minimize risk, right? We're trying to minimize and take risk off the table. A very small risk, but what happens if banks close down? What happens if the electricity grid gets hit? You want to have some extra cash that you can put your hands on that if you can't get into a bank. You know, this happened, they closed the banks down in Greece for a couple of weeks, and citizens of that country could not get to their money. So you got to take that off the table by having a little bit of money stashed outside. Then Plan A and Plan B investment strategy. And I'm going to talk about this a lot. In fact, I'm going to do a teaching course specifically on this because I think this is at the root of the problem for most investors. Everybody's got a Plan A when the market goes up, but what happens when the market goes down? And contrary to popular belief or what the financial services industry wants you to believe, it does go down. And it makes no sense to be a Plan A investor in a Plan B environment, right? It just makes no sense at all. So you got to have two different strategies and make sure that you know exactly when risk climbs, what are you going to do? How are you going to position your portfolio? Because you got to get into protection mode, and you got to have a growth and protection mode when it comes to managing money. Here's the reality of it, is if you go back any time in history, and especially think about this in the 30s, during the Great Depression, do you think people were hopeful for a bright future? Do you think that they looked at the future with great certainty? What about in the 70s, during massive inflation? Do you think that people looked in the future and said, boy, I'm confident that things are going to be okay? No, I think that the bottom line is we tend to take and compartmentalize this time period we're in, and we say, you know, things look worse than they ever have. No, the future has always been uncertain. That's the reality of it is. But the bottom line is you prepare and you make sure that you have all your accounts straight, all your planning, and make sure that you're prepared for anything that could happen.